Okay, Harold, let's carry on with discussing aspects of love, and you're describing different aspects of love in your book. The Unconditional Love Is Appreciating Aspects of Life. You list 63 different aspects of unconditional love, and you devote a page to each with a short explanation of each of them. And I'd particularly like to ask you about the page about unity. Actually, I'm particularly interested in unity because it's one of the things that I've been working on myself, and I was told quite some time ago that I ought to encourage and support other people in experiencing and developing unity in their own lives. So I'm particularly interested to hear what you've got to say about this. So let me just read this short passage from the book, headed Unity. We all live upon this wonderful planet, sharing our laughter and tears, hopes and dreams. It matters not what size, shape, colour or creed our fundamental foundation is in our collective human experience and potential to become more. Unity recognises the oneness of humanity and the possibilities to create together through love. Whenever we separate ourselves through judging ourselves or another, we limit our experience. Through limited awareness, opinions and criticism, we deny the fullness of each other's potential. The reverse is also true. When we come from love and unity, we help ourselves and our fellow travellers become all we can be. Unconditional love is unity. Loving everyone unconditionally ensures we can live in unity and peace in this world when we choose to do so. So this is about recognizing the oneness of humanity, but you also say about judging ourselves as well. When we separate ourselves through judging ourselves or another, we limit our experience. I mean, what would you feel is the key to unity being an aspect of unconditional love?
Well, as I've worked with my own understandings, expanded my own conscious awareness, over the last couple of decades, really striving to understand what unconditional love means to me, and hence how I came upon this short list of 63 qualities that were ways to better understand unconditional love. Unconditional love is really a unified experience, and yet we can take it out as kind of a holographic or fragmented view to help us understand the essence by creating components. That same fundamental, shall we just call it a kind of an equation or approach or a way to understand how unconditional love relates to me and how I relate to the world with unconditional love, is also how I became more aware of my own sense of fracturedness, components, aspects. And I think in our day-to-day lives, and again from where I came from, there was no sense of love, self-love, self-appreciation, self-acceptance, or unconditional love initially. Certainly wasn't, something that I fully recognized in my childhood or my early adult years or even my adult years. And, yes, absolutely, my parents brought me into the world, and I'm sure that a part of them absolutely loves me unconditionally. Yet, as they were trying to raise me, their own fragmented selves, their own inner criticisms, all of that, of course, becomes part of the raising process, the teaching process. But think about this going on for generations, good things being passed along and not so good things being passed along. And, we find ourselves, with near 7 billion people on the planet, there's a lot of ideas, well-intentioned in most instances, yet ideas that are literally cover a broad spectrum or an infinite spectrum of what everybody has thought something else should look like, someone else should look like, how they thought how they should relate to the world. And I think we've in many ways moved so far away from our center point, so far away from who we are, so far from really understanding ourselves intrinsically and intimately. We've become projections of what we think we should look like to the world around us. We become what we think everybody else will accept. We become what we think everybody else wants us to be. And what that has done in an exponential nature, just in this century alone, with the increase in population, is there's an infinite number of ways that people appear to one another. And again, with this whole notion of taking all these externalizations and bringing them internal, the first place to bring about a sense of unity is to unify all these aspects in myself. All these things that I think I should be, all these inner desires that I have, the inner dreams, coupled with the inner criticisms, the inner doubts, the inner concerns, the inner fears, when I can start bringing all those together and start acknowledging them. And I think that's a key piece to unity, is when we begin to accept all these aspects, they have a tendency to evolve, morph, dissipate, grow. In other words, the more we accept, the truly beneficial, strong, courageous qualities become amplified. Very different than when we are amplifying our fears and our doubts in a non-unified approach. So unity truly begins within ourselves. The more we can accept ourselves, the more we can bring ourselves into a sense of acceptance and love, and recognizing our physicalness, our emotions, our mental aspect, and even our bigger, broader space that we could call spiritual is kind of a universal understanding. When we bring all of those into alignment, we begin to understand how each one impacts and affects the other. As we bring to our own sense, like when we're not, say we're physically tired, our emotions can become more sporadic and erratic. If we're highly mental, very focused mental, we might be very goal-oriented, and we may drive ourselves, literally crazy, or we might drive our physical body to a sense of exhaustion because we're highly focused with a mental attachment. As we can step away and start to look at more of a unified hold within ourselves, and this is certainly my experience, because I am all these things I'm describing, I have done, thankfully to lesser and lesser degrees as I've become more conscious of it. But, when I did not understand any of these, never even gave any of this a single second of contemplation, I simply worked out of all the habits. I worked out of all the suggestions. I did everything that I thought I was supposed to do to make everyone else happy, and found myself with increasing unhappiness inwardly or internally. So for me, the step that made the most sense was to begin to unify myself. I can say again from my own experience, the more I've done that, the more I've expanded and accepted and brought all of my talents, my strengths, and my weaknesses into an understanding, and been ever increasingly less critical and more accepting and more aware of all these aspects of me. A very fascinating phenomena has occurred that perhaps I didn't necessarily expect, but that which was happening within me began to externalize, and I started to experience greater and greater connection with those around me, a greater and greater connection to unifying myself with the world around me, and particularly with people. And this highly, I would say focused, but I was very determined, had a strong desire to bring about greater unity in myself. This intention had a very beautiful effect in my life, is that the more I became unified within, more unity I brought into my life through my thoughts, my feelings, my physical, when I brought things into greater balance and greater harmony, I started to view the world with greater balance and greater harmony. And I became more global in my orientation. I became more aware of how, yes, indeed, the smile on my face is the same animating smile in the face of a person thousands of miles away in a completely different culture, in a completely different upbringing, and completely different circumstances. There was a universal connection, literally between me and every other person on the planet. And this became a part of my experience naturally because I became more aware of me. And I became more aware of all of the aspects of me. And the more I understood myself, the more I began to understand these same universal natures in everyone else. And the more I accepted myself, the more easily it's become to accept these same natures in others. And I'm not just talking about the good things. I'm talking about, it's one thing we can accept, oh, we're really good at such thing, and so we see that, that greatness in somebody else. If we think we're really, good in business, we see all the powerful and successful business people. I'm talking about all of it. I'm talking about my doubts. When I understand my doubts, my fears, I can see and accept and embrace them in me. I can see and accept and embrace them in another. It used to be that when I saw them in others and I didn't recognize them in myself, there was conflict. It brought about, to see these things in other people created a separation. Now I actually have compassion. Compassion has been something that has been a wonderful blossoming component of my life, because the more accepting I am of myself, the more compassion I have for others who are going through or have gone through or may go through something that we all go through. And that compassion allows me to be there as a greater force and a greater strength of love as somebody else is going through. And I'm no longer separated from other people's pain and suffering, goodness and joy. I am part of it because I have it in me. And as I understand it in me, I understand it in others. So unity started within has become a distinct understanding of the unity without. And the unity that brings us all together has, again, this one central component, love, and particularly unconditional love. And we talk about it somewhat of a linear term. I'm talking about internalizing to then externalize. Rightly understood, these things are happening all the time simultaneously. So in a way, it's kind of circular flow. One begets the other. We can also begin to look at life with greater love, and that greater love gets reflected back, which gives us greater love, which allows us to give greater love. And so it is a circular flow. But to help people begin the steps, what I share is how I've kind of taken it upon myself to understand it for myself. And infinite number of teachers, infinite number of teachings. In other words, I've gone from taking very singular-minded ways of looking at life to embracing with a broad, open mind, letting life teach me, show me, share with me. So there's an external component in a way that as I walk through life, choosing to love more, I let life show me how love exists, which allows me to have more of that confidence in my own connection to this love, and it becomes exponential and expanding. That's how unity grows within us. Yes, there are things we do within ourselves, and while we're growing inside and unifying and accepting self, there will be this natural aspect of we will start to look at all the beautiful unifying features all around us. And if we go truly global, say for a particular example, our planet, thankfully with the scientific experiences, where we have rockets that can go out in outer space, we now have images that we didn't have 100 years ago of our Earth. And truly seen just from a mile or two up, there are no borders, there are no walls, there are no nations, it's simply this beautiful blue orb. And that is where I've brought my consciousness to. I don't see the borders, and thankfully my work has allowed me to have even greater direct experience, that I'm connected with people around the world now, representing every culture and tradition. And the way I enjoy it so is I see the heart component in each of these people. I don't see specifically their culture, their creed, their tradition. I see the heart component. I see the universal self. I see their challenges and joys as my challenges and joys, which allows me to interact with them in a completely different way, which allows me to be more universal, which also encourages them to be more universal. And certainly in the past decade alone, as I've done more of this and worked with people around the world in greater and greater collaboration and unity, we have all found greater and greater collaboration and unity. And that is how we will bring peace and abundance for example, on this planet, is by beginning to look at ourselves in relationship to everything around us, rather than simply gazing upon everything around us and having a separation from that which we see.
So when you're helping people to experience and develop unity, are you talking more about transcending the differences and going to the points of common humanity and you know, the things that are the same about people, because there are obviously an infinite number of differences between people? Or is there also something of a whole approach to people which starts with an understanding that we are all unified and that we have grounds for a sense of oneness and love for one another? So you tend to disregard the more superficial differences. Or does it also involve embracing differences in different cultures, different faiths, different approaches to life? Or is it all both and all of that?
Yes, yes, and yes, and yes. And probably the last part is the biggest yes, is that it is one holistic, ever-evolving whole.
Mm-hmm.
I think perhaps one of the greatest opportunities we face right now on our planet is with what can appear to be one of the greatest challenges. The nature of how we've kind of fragmented ourselves with all these many generations of, beliefs and stories and traditions, and this is what's correct and this is what's not correct, and then another generation turns that inside out, and another generation turns that upside down. It has become so fragmented that most people are so far removed from themselves and so busy being what they think they are supposed to be based on other people's interpretations or views, which is really their own. Again, we have to come back to the self, is that we can say we're doing all these things to fit into society, and yet that's just our excuse to fit into society. That's still walking away from the responsibility that we're trying to find a sense of self-acceptance. Because the only reason we'd want to fit in is because we want others to accept us, which means we don't really accept ourselves. So there's this beautiful, I can't even say it's necessarily circular, it's definitely not linear. It's really spherical and probably multidimensional. It's everything and nothing all at the same time, which is probably why people haven't taken the time to embrace it, to understand it, because it is so multidimensional. There's so many ways you can understand it. That I could say now, yes, in that really big picture, let us look at humanity as our foundational. Yes, we all have the potential, and we all have, in other words, let's look at the biggest picture where humanity is all in love and all in a collective oneness. And then we come back to ourselves as part of that process to understand that unity. I could say, today, well, yes, of course, if you have that really big picture, then you will fill yourself into that goal, that desire to understand that big picture. I can also say that's not how I started out. I did not look at the planet from the standpoint, oh yes, this is all, the potential of us is to love together, and this is how we'll create peace and abundance, and that's not what happened at all. I didn't see that because I was trained from this separation understanding. And I think that's the critical piece to discuss unity, is to understand that where we have come from is an extreme sense of separation, down to our identity, to what we wear, where we live, whether we have education or not, whether we have religion or not, whether we live in the right place, right side of the tracks or not. Then you go to a community level, and within that community, then our collectives, religious traditions and friendship traditions and associations and groups that we belong to. And then you go to, for us, in the Western culture, is a state collection, which is a collection of these communities, towns, villages, cities. And then you go to a national, and every one of these have built within them a sense of separation. Each one wants to identify with their individual collective visions. And there's the little collective vision, ourself, then there's community collective vision, which is multiple aspects of our relationship. Then there's bigger collective called a state, and a bigger collective called a nation, and then a bigger collective that we call a region or a group of nations. And somewhere along the line we get to perhaps the earth, if we're ever fortunate to get that far. Perhaps the biggest difficulty we face is overcoming this inertia to identify singularly, to identify ourselves within a self, what we're wearing, driving, doing, being, and then to participate in family units, community units, and national units, and believe that we are all these things. The more we unify ourselves, again, this has been my experience, the more I unify myself and understand all these many aspects of myself, the more the boundaries, walls, borders have fallen away. So I evolved into this bigger picture by understanding that if I could greater and greater acceptance of self, somewhat, even initially I could even say somewhat selfishly, as I wanted to understand myself. And yet by making that choice to take my attention within and really begin to understand who I am and what makes me who I am versus what I think I'm supposed to be, and there's usually a very big gap between those two, really coming from my heart, really following my dreams, not the dreams of others, really understanding what those dreams are, even that the potential exists that I could follow them or expand them or grow them or create them. That has created this fantastic phenomena, this experience, this transcendent experience of where, as I've done that, I've become more connected to the whole world. And the whole world now is a part of me. And there are fewer and fewer with each passing moment boundaries and separations. Overcoming that initial inertia does take a fair amount of courage and strength and desire, because we are constantly reinforced with separation. We're constantly reinforced with nationalism, religious tendencies, all these various things which in themselves don't have to go away. We just need to understand the right relationship. And when we understand the right relationship, they evolve. Our experience with them evolves, and then they in fact do evolve. As we've seen, in this century alone, especially in Western cultures, we've been able to overcome the inertia of quite a bit of separatism insofar as, say, cultural rights. Not all countries experience that right now, but in quite a few countries, we've overcome the inertia of class systems and differences in group cultures. So there is a unifying whole that is happening collectively as we expand more of our individuality within that collective.
So the key then to developing unity is within oneself, first of all. This is where it starts.
From my perspective, and certainly, again, from a slightly different perspective, one can focus all their energy and attention outwardly and strive to reach that big picture, and absolutely can reach that big picture. If they've got that big picture, they will achieve reaching that understanding of that big picture. And they may have the reverse experience that I had by going after that big picture and understanding on a global. They might find through that process that they've all of a sudden become very aware of themselves. So again, there is no one way to do this. There's no one linear structure. There's no 5 steps from here to there. The idea is becoming consciously aware of all of our aspects together, all these qualities of love, our relationship to these qualities, how love relates to everything around us. The fact that love is even there. Would have asked me a few decades ago, I don't think I would have had even the beginning answer. What is love? What is it? What is it? What does it do? I had no sense of relationship to love. Used the word a lot, no sense of relationship. Now, over the years, I've become so much more aware by direct experience. And that is the difference between knowledge. We have the direct experience. One knows oneself as oneself. You can't find that in a book. It's through the direct experience. Unity will come through the direct experience of feeling and connecting with unity.
And however you choose to do it, whether you start within oneself or in the whole world, the important thing is to develop a sense of unity from which develops unconditional love in your life.
Right. And in these cases, the various qualities that are laid out in this particular book are simply beginning points, places of contemplation. And again, I'm not here to define how one will experience that or what their definition of unity might be. I'm here to share that if they begin to contemplate what unity means in their life, they will have an experience of some type. And the more they delve into it, the more they allow it to expand as their part of their psyche, as part of their consciousness, part of their understanding, part of their experience, the more they will actually experience it beyond a definition or beyond a label or beyond a concept. They'll actually have an experience of unity. And if each of us take that upon ourselves, it would be a short order, and we collectively on the planet would have a sense of unity.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we would begin to collaborate, cooperate, work together in a sense of unity. But rather than waiting for the world to get there, we have the opportunity to begin to create it in ourselves. So hopefully that kind of explains your unity too, in the sense that you've had a similar desire and goal to help unify.
Yes, and you've described something very similar to the way that it was described to me, which was to experiencing unity is to see oneself in the world and the world in oneself. And I think that's the key to it, and you've expanded on that and explained it very nicely. Thanks very much.
Sure. Always a pleasure.